It is a brand new edition of Flyers Daily, a Monday edition, which everybody knows what that means. Well, they know also it's brought to you by Ticketmaster, Make More Memories Live. But every Monday, we get to talk to the man from PhiladelphiaFlyers.com, NHL.com, and HockeyBuzz.com. It is Bill Meltzer. Bill, it's our last visit of the month of May. And when we convene next week, it'll be the month of June. And I saw the proposed schedule for the Stanley Cup Final, and if it goes 7, it could end as late as June 24th. You ever recall such a thing?
That's wild. No, some lockout years where they only played half a season. The playoffs started kind of late, but no, not the normal 82 game season. Obviously, COVID aside.
Yeah, they started one in August.
Yeah, right.
Or they started the bubble in August, and that went into the fall, and then they quick turned around to another shortened season, the 56-gamer. But yeah, that just seems like incredibly late to me.
Yeah,
and the schedules are already so condensed. Bill, how's this all going to kind of suss out next year? You're talking about you're going to have a World Cup of Hockey coming, and an Olympics, and still an All-Star week. Like, how is this going to suss out with this schedule?
It's going to be hard, particularly the teams that have short summers. It really is going to put an emphasis on resting while you can. Obviously, you try to put in a strong off season too, but it's it just speaks to how little off season there truly is, because even teams that don't make the playoffs, you're not resting for that long till you're back on the ice and getting ready for the next season. It's grueling, no doubt about it. So that's going to be that'll be a huge challenge, obviously. And the guys that go and in the summertime and need surgeries too, you don't get much recovery time. So it's hard in a lot of ways.
Bill, looking at these final 4 teams, and these 2 playoff series thus far have been really interesting, really fun, really competitive. And we've seen some teams play to their identity, like the Rangers in that really dangerous power play in the first couple of rounds, and really didn't do a ton 5-on-5, but got it done on the man advantage. And you see, a team like Dallas that kind of just so much depth, right? And you see where they drafted guys like Robertson 39th and Wyatt Johnston. You see all these guys, and Stankoven and Ottinger and the veterans of, Sagan's got 2 goals in game 1, and Jamie Benn. And then you see a team like Edmonton who has not played to their identity. And the reason why they're in the conference finals is because they haven't. They learned how to lock it. Like that last series they were in, they locked down Vancouver defensively. Yeah. What a job Chris Knobloch's done there, by the way.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
To get that team to buy in on that end of the ice like they have, unreal.
Yeah, and they got to a really poor start too in the season. When he came in, they were all kind of already behind the 8 ball. They had a lot of catching up to do. So yeah, he's done a fantastic job.
But you look at these 4 teams, Bill, and I always like to get to this point and kind of go, okay, what can we learn from these teams? And I think there's an element to learn from all of them. But the one consistent factor with all of these teams, and it's not goaltending, which usually would be the consistent factor in a Final Four, the consistent factor has been depth players combined with top players, pulling equal weight here. I think that's the biggest element in a 32-team league.
No, without question. Now, and they were putting on the broadcast on Sunday, the Rangers game, the ice time distribution. I mean, particularly in terms of, they had the one, Rempe didn't really play very much, only played about 4 minutes in the game. But otherwise, you have to roll your lines. You really, talking about the grueling nature of it too. It's the teams that can roll those lines, have different heroes and different nights.
Yeah. Alex Wenberg, come on, you didn't see that coming.
He hadn't scored. He hardly scored after coming over, to the Rangers, and then he got the deflection goal that won it. I mean, got to feel for a goalie on that one. Being a goalie, right? No stopping that one. But it really takes players different places around your lineup, stepping up in different games. And
like Barclay Goodrow did it again too.
Goodrow has been that's a great example too, where
Yep.
you have guys that particularly when the pressure's ratcheted up in the postseason, you know how certain guys who they lift their game to a whole other level that you don't see during the season, and that is something that is pretty universal on teams that make deep runs. The teams that are over reliant on one line, one or two superstars, those are the teams that tend to go out early. I mean that in general, at least.
Yeah, I think another lesson to be learned, Bill, is one that Edmonton has put forward here, and not just the fact that they're not just trying to outscore teams, they're ratcheting down. I mean, the way they've protected the middle of the ice in the D zone has been remarkable to me. But the real lesson here is to not give up on D guys too young. And Evan Bouchard is a fine example of that, because people were ready to toss him in the recycle bin and ship him out many times over.
No, for sure. And goalies typically take the longest to develop, but defensemen aren't too far behind that.
Yeah.
And
especially bigger framed guys.
Yeah, particularly the bigger frame guys, and they there's growing pains to go through. And that's why sometimes if you rush a guy too early to the NHL, you can really, really hurt him. Sometimes permanently, where he never bounces back. It really takes a lot of patience to. I've heard people who played in the league say, defensemen say they were in the league 200 games before they really started to figure it out.
Didn't Roger Nielsen say it was about 300 or 400 games?
Yeah. I particularly remember Bundy though saying it was about 200 games in the league before he felt like, okay, I kind of know how to play in this league, and there are guys who never quite figure it out, but you have to stay patient with them, and you have to live through some, particularly the early part of their career, some pretty tough times. Some of the best defensemen in the league had early rough. Chris Pronger, he's a great example. His early years in Hartford, his first year or two in St. Louis, those were not stellar years. It took patience till Pronger emerges as the Chris Pronger we all remember. So it takes time. Victor Hedman's another one. His very early career, there was a lot of struggle early on, and and some guys don't click till they're in their mid-20s. So if you see the ability there, and you can see, some progression in other areas, or a guy finds another niche sometimes. Sometimes you envision a player one way, particularly as an offensive defenseman, because they, even guys who don't go on to become point producers in the NHL at the lower levels tend to play on the power play. They tend to put a good number, and they have to learn to play a whole other way.
Yeah. When
they come up to the NHL, and that takes time. And Bouchard's a great example of a guy who there were a lot of growing pains with him, and now he's on the other side of that.
The interesting thing about that too, there's a segment of fan base that says play the kids, but you got to learn the game at the professional level, and the NHL is just so unforgiving. That you got to realize these are young kids. They're not coming out at 22. You shove a 19-year-old in there, and he, his perception of his abilities can go sideways really fast, because this league can make you look so pedestrian so quickly and consistently that you have to be careful. It's why I've been really impressed with Cam York, because there's a quietness to the way he plays. There's a quietness to his personality, but there's a swagger and a confidence that, there is a lot of confidence in that player underneath this cool demeanor. But that's why I've been so impressed with the way he has kind of adjusted. But not every player is built the same way mentally, physically, and all, to handle the ups and downs. And he's a player that played some really important collegiate hockey and for his country.
No, for sure. And I in his case, I think moving back to his natural side helped him a lot too.
Comfortability,
yeah. But even when there have been struggles, the confidence level was never really shaken. I mean, some players have to work through that crisis of confidence. Particularly over when they realize, well, this is a hard league. You make a small mistake and the recovery window is often not there. It ends up in the back of your net, and and that could be hard. I mean, one of the biggest hurdles I think for a lot of young players, but especially defensemen, is how do they recover from a mistake? Does it roll downhill from there? And that's something sometimes with so many young players that it's after that mistake is made or there's a bad game, they can go south in a hurry a lot of times. And I mean that is something about York where it kind of all rolls off his back. And some guys that trade is always there. A lot of guys have to develop that over time. Some guys never really develop that. In turn, I think back in Flyers history, a guy who had all the tools in the world, Carl Dykhouse had all the tools in the world. Big guy, could skate, physically strong, hard shot. He could physically do it all. But when that first mistake would happen, it would just roll straight downhill from there, and you might lose him for 3 weeks. And it just so there's so much in the makeup of a player that some of it can be taught, and a lot of it has to come from inside.
Yeah, it's the disposition of a player. All of that, Bill, to lead me to this question, because when I think of the really important elements going into next season, and it was a big element that happened during last season. It was that night when the Flyers were playing Pittsburgh, and we hear about the Cutter Gauthier trade to Anaheim, and they get in return in that deal, along with the pick, they get Jamie Drysdale. Now, Drysdale comes in with the Flyers. I thought he, from a personality standpoint, really difficult situation to come from the West Coast the way he did, but did have some familiar faces. I'm sure that helped. All in all, he played 24 games for the Flyers. He ended up with 5 points. Got into some meaningful hockey that he probably wouldn't have seen in Anaheim this year. Didn't stay healthy, and that's been an issue. But he just turned 22 in April. This is just a monumental 22 to 23-year-old season for Jamie Drysdale on a lot of fronts, health being one of them.
Oh, without a question. Even if this next year isn't his big takeoff point, you want to see a little more consistency. He came into a very different kind of system, had another injury issue. All those things are going to take some time. And we were talking about the patience side of it. I think a little more patience is in order, but you want to see steps taken by the player too. All the tools are there. His skating certainly that stands out. I think a lot of the off puck stuff, he saw things to prove there. And I think that this would be at this age would be a point where you want to see him progress to he showed hints of it, particularly his first couple games with the Flyers, nice assist in his very first game and whatever. They're the hints, they're the elements there, but you want to see him start to put some of the pieces together. And considering who you traded for him too, you really, I really think that he's a guy. There'll be a lot of pressure on him. I want to see, we'll see who his partner will be over the. Will be Sanheim playing with him? Somebody else? We'll see. Yeah, we'll see. But that's one. When we get deep into the offseason and camp rolls around, we talk. What are the question marks? What do we need to see? Yeah. I think Jamie's one of those guys right near the top of the list who needs to take steps the next year.
Bill, one of the names that's out there being mentioned quite a bit, and it was since the Carolina Hurricanes were dispatched from the playoffs, and obviously, they have some changes in their front office. Tom Waddell's gone. Right now, Eric Tulsky is the interim GM. We'll see if he gets the position. I think if he gets the position, they're going to have to hire somebody for more of the presidential business elements of it, because Waddell handled a lot of that as well. But one of the names that's out there is Martin Necas. And he is a guy, he's a restricted free agent. I had a guy run into me at the Wawa the other day and said, hey, is Danny the type of guy that would go out there and throw an offer sheet? I don't see Danny Briere doing that at this time. I think that's really a dicey situation. You don't want to become a GM that other teams don't want to deal with, especially after like that complicated deal with Drysdale and Gauthier and keeping that under wraps and some other things as well. The Fedotov situation was kept under wraps. I don't think you want to operate that way. But Natchez is a guy that really intrigues me as a possible trade target for a team that's going to have a lot of moving parts there in Carolina. Is that the type of player you look at and you go, okay, this is something that I would definitely be interested in from that hockey trade perspective for the Flyers?
Potentially. I mean, he clearly is a highly skilled player, can really skate.
Yep.
High-end draft pick, all those things. Sometimes those players aren't easy to get.
Good size, too. I mean, 6'.
Size, too. He brings the size element, too.
Yeah.
Now, although he was drafted, as a guy who could play center, he hasn't really played much center in recent years. He's been a winger. Now,
and a right
that's
winger,
fine.
That's a problem.
Yeah. That's fine. I mean, but that enables you to trade from a position of strength too, because the Flyers are, that's one of their stronger spots in the lineup is right wing. I mean, that's a guy who could come in and step in and be an impact player for you. It's certainly the talent levels there. That's a player, you could potentially make a hockey trade for, and he could come in and help a team. And he still's relatively young too, so he fits the timeline as well.
Yeah, he's 25 now. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's one of those guys that if there's a trade to be made, I certainly think the Flyers would and should have some interest.
You get Jake Voracek involved in that a little bit to try and sell the man on Philadelphia, which brings me to my next question, Bill. I've been going back and forth with this guy on Twitter on DMs. I'll leave his name out of it, but I brought him up last week on the pod. He's just deathly afraid watching these teams. The Flyers don't have high-end talent, and they'll never have high-end talent. And he messaged me yesterday during the Ranger game, and it just that watching these teams play, and again, Rangers Panthers stokes my fear for the Flyers. He said the Rangers got Lafreniere through a top pick. They got Fox through trades. Yeah, Fox forced his way there. They signed Panarin. Panarin was going nowhere else. Panthers similar with Reinhart. Barkov was a draft pick there. Bob's a trade. Actually, Bobrovsky was a free agent signing. And he said for the Flyers, maybe we have Michkov. Will we be able to sign somebody? Development talent is not enough to bank on. Who can we trade or trade for? And I said, I told him, I said, look, of course they're going to be able to sign players. They're going to have a ton of money, not this offseason, next offseason. Yeah. And if you remain fiscally responsible, you always have a till there that when opportunity strikes, you can not go into it. He said, I also said to him, I said, they shouldn't spend frivolously this summer. First, not a great free agent class, cap rising. We've gone through that. I told him, I said, you need to stop watching the playoffs and worrying yourself. You're going to drive yourself mental. I said to him, this is a process. It's going to take time. But this is the point. Philadelphia is a desirable market for players to come to. It's a big market, top 5 in the country. It's got some of the easiest travel in the NHL, which is good for players to sleep in their own bed more often than most teams. If you have a young family, that obviously helps as well. They've got ownership with very deep pockets. They have an unreal, like the facilities, the makeover they've done at the practice facility the last couple of years, and at Wells Fargo with the locker rooms and everything else. Those things matter. Not to mention a fan base that really cares about the team, cares about the players as both players and humans, and cares about winning. So this is a very desirable place to come for players when considering do I waive a partial no move clause, or if I'm free agency, do I want to sign it? This is a place where people are going to want to come. And as Danny and Jonesy build this from a character standpoint behind the scenes, that's going to pan out.
Oh, I think so. I think that's a big piece of the objective here, right? And
it's order number 1 on the bill.
Yeah.
Order number 1.
And a big part of what sells a player coming to a team, they'll talk to guys that have played there, and or currently or in the past, and they'll say, hey, listen, like I love playing in Philly, and the even things like that. Danny's around the locker room, and Dan Hilferty. The same way guys, I mean, that was a big part of what made Ed Snyder, so special, was
personal touch.
It was a personal touch. Players knew that the organization cared about them or invested in their success. Not just financially, but in terms of the facilities, right? What is your day in and day out like? And I mean, that's I think it speaks to the fact that most players that have been here as their contract comes towards the latter stages want to stay here. Now obviously there's dollars and cents and years, and it's a business, but most players ultimately they want to stay around here for the long haul, and you can hear it. You can hear it in the way that even sometimes the players from the outside talk.
Eric Johnson was very vocal about being here, and
right, and that's a guy who's been out west his whole career.
Yeah,
and he wasn't here very long, but that's the guy who who makes I mean, those kind of veteran players sometimes can really be really good spokesmen. And again, and even guys that have only been around for a short time. I was only there for a short time. I was only there for a few months, but I felt welcome. I felt like I belonged. I felt like it's a team that's dedicated to getting better, and I think in the long haul, if you go there, you'll like it. I mean, it's something where, listen, that was misplaced for a while, truthfully, right?
It was, yep.
And that's something you don't get it back overnight. And I think one of the biggest areas in the last year, particularly, huge strides have been taken in that regard of rebuilding it as a place where players want to come and be part of it. Still steps to go, obviously, and showing, listen, making the playoffs this year would have been a nice step in that regard. Let's be honest, right?
Agreed.
But in the overall big picture, when you're trying to lure players to come in, at a certain point, at a certain market value, they're going to have their choice of destinations.
Yeah.
So in the long haul, I think it's positive, and we'll see how players come along. You can't go by necessarily what they do in the year after they're drafted, like Bonk, right? Bonk looks like he took big steps in his first year after the draft. Actually, when Brian Smith and I just did the last prospect pipeline, we were talking about how you want that progression from year one after the draft to year two, to first year as a pro and onward. And then this was a good year for the Flyers farm system too, because a lot of guys took steps. Last year's draft, too early to say it was a success, but even beyond Michkov, it looks like some guys took huge developmental strides in that first year.
Bonk and Barkey right in that list.
The Memorial Cup right now, and Bonk had a big game, first start in the first game. So it's a lengthy process, right? And it's that they never promised overnight, and I think you still have to look at it in those terms, that it's not something that's going to be a magical thing within a year, but in terms of where the Flyers are now versus where they were a year ago, I do
18 months ago.
Yeah,
very different world.
Big steps. Yes.
It's interesting because I think the GM and the president have an interesting story to tell when they meet with these players, because Danny chose Philadelphia on the free agent market,
coming off the worst year in franchise history too.
Yep, yeah. and he chose this place and then chose to make it home. Keith Jones was traded here and then signed a contract here, and I think he played 18 games under that new contract, and he couldn't go anymore, and he was paid for the remainder of his contract. Now that's all handled by. Back then it was different. And Keith Jones made this his home, made his career here as a broadcaster locally, nationally, and everything else. So there's interesting stories to tell. I remember Keith Yandel, too, after he was finished playing, and he's played his last year in Philadelphia, of course. He said, I had a problem with the way he said it. I had the most fun I've ever had in my career that 1 year in Philadelphia, my last year, which I had a problem with that because the team sucked out loud.
Yeah.
It shouldn't have been that fun. But this is a play. And I think the travel part of that is a really, really big part of the equation as well. So it will be a place that players look to come. And Chris Pronger did a thread a while back on, playing for the Flyers in the East Coast travel compared to playing in Anaheim or in Edmonton or St. Louis, all the different places he played. And it was really revealing how much of a factor that could be. I think he said he slept in his bed like 70% more, his own bed,
right,
playing on the East Coast than he did when he played for Anaheim. That's incredible.
That is wild. And, and then just a final point about the facilities where, a lot of players choose to stay in the area and work out here over the summer, which is, which I guess, that doesn't happen everywhere.
Yeah.
And so that's something too, that's an advantage. It's a competitive advantage. It's why so much gets invested in it. So, it takes a while to pay off, but the first steps have been taken, positively in that regard.
Attentive and caring owners can make a difference. I always remember going back to Mark Cuban when he bought the Dallas Mavericks. And he said, there's only so much I can do. I can only pay players so much money. I have a salary cap and their structure. But I can make sure that when they walk into the locker room, they had the latest Xbox, PlayStation. It was like a party. Like, you'd get there and you'd be like, no other team is doing that. Like, it didn't even matter if you were going to use it or not. It was there if you wanted to.
Yeah.
You had every amenity. He wanted those things to go through the league like a wildfire, like a brush fire of what he was willing to do to be more attractive than other teams. And I think that is important. There's a lesson to be learned there as well. All right, great stuff, Bill. Read Bill's work at PhiladelphiaFlyers.com, NHL.com, and HockeyBuzz.com. We'll be back Wednesday. Flyers Exit Day Player Interview Series will continue. Join us then for a brand new Flyers Daily.